They thought she was trash. They thought she was a gold digger who got lucky. When Grant Caldwell forced his quiet wife to sign the divorce papers, he laughed, thinking he'd saved his family's fortune from a nobody. He left her with nothing but a suitcase and a cab fare. The whole town of Greenwich whispered about her humiliation. But they forgot one thing: you should never judge a book by its cover, especially when that book is holding all your secrets. 2 months later, the Caldwells arrived at the charity gala of the decade, expecting to be royalty. Then the wind picked up. A Gulfstream G650 descended from the clouds, and when the doors opened, the woman who stepped out didn't just stop the party, she ended Grant's entire life. This is the story of the quiet divorce that screamed revenge. The pen scratched against the heavy, cream-colored paper. It was the only sound in the room, louder than the rain beating against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Manhattan penthouse. Madeline didn't shake. Her hand was steady as she traced the loops of her name, the ink soaking into the line that would sever her 5-year marriage to Grant Caldwell. "Finally," a voice sneered from the corner of the room. It was Lenora Grant's mother. She was perched on a velvet armchair like a vulture in Chanel, clutching a glass of Chardonnay as if it were a weapon. "I told you, Grant. I told you 5 years ago. It always ends like this with her kind." Grant Caldwell stood by the window looking out at the grey skyline of New York City. He didn't even turn around. He was a handsome man in that manufactured way that money buys: perfect teeth, perfect hair, tailored suit. But his posture was rigid. He was annoyed, not sad, just annoyed that this meeting was taking up his Tuesday afternoon. "Is it done?" Grant asked, checking his watch, a Patek Philippe. Madeline had bought it for him for his 30th birthday, saving for 2 years from her allowance to get it. He probably didn't remember. "It's done," Madeline said softly. Her voice was low, melodic, but devoid of the warmth that used to define it. She capped the pen and pushed the document across the mahogany table toward the lawyer, Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson, a man who had known the Caldwell family for 30 years, looked at Madeline with a flicker of pity behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He checked the signature. "Madeline, you understand what this entails. Clause 4B, you are waiving your right to alimony. You are waiving your claim to the Caldwell marital assets. You are leaving with essentially what you came in with." "She came in with nothing," Lenora interjected sharply, standing up and walking over to the table. She picked up the papers, scanning them greedily. "So she leaves with nothing. That was the deal. The prenup was ironclad, and thank God for it. We aren't running a charity for failed waitresses." Madeline stood up. She was wearing a simple beige trench coat and flat shoes. She wore no jewelry. She looked small in the cavernous office, surrounded by the weight of the Caldwell legacy. But she didn't look defeated. "I understand the terms, Mr. Henderson," Madeline said. "I don't want the money. I don't want the house in the Hamptons. I don't want the shares in Caldwell Logistics." Grant finally turned around. He looked at her, his blue eyes narrowing slightly. "You don't want anything. You're not going to fight for the apartment or the car." "No," Madeline said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. She upended it onto the table. Her engagement ring, a 3-carat solitaire that Lenora had picked out, because she didn't trust Madeline's taste, clattered onto the wood, spinning before coming to a rest. Beside it, she placed the simple gold wedding band. "I just want out, Grant," she said. Grant let out a scoff, a short, sharp breath of disbelief. "Playing the martyr to the end, Maddie." You think if you act noble, I'll write you a check out of pity. I know you. I know you're terrified. You're 32. You have no degree, no job history for the last 5 years, and no home. Where are you going to go? Back to that trailer park in Ohio. That's none of your concern anymore, Madeline replied. Her eyes drifted to the door, where a young woman had been, accidentally, waiting in the hallway for the last 20 minutes. Jessica. She was 23, the daughter of a senator and Grant's executive assistant. She was currently leaning against the door frame, pretending to check her emails, but her smirk was visible even from a distance. I suppose Jessica is waiting for you, Madeline added. Grant didn't even have the grace to look ashamed. Jessica understands the business, Maddie. She fits into this world. You tried. I'll give you that. You tried to dress the part and act the part, but you were always just playing house. Lenora clinked her glass with her fingernail. Oh, stop explaining yourself to her, Grant. She signed. The leech is detached. Let's go. We have the merger dinner at Le Bernardin tonight, and Jessica needs to get changed. Madeline picked up her handbag. It was an old leather bag, one she had before she met Grant. Goodbye, Grant. Goodbye, Lenora. Don't expect a reference, Lenora called out as Madeline walked toward the heavy oak doors. Madeline paused with her hand on the brass handle. She didn't look back. I won't need one. She opened the door, walked past Jessica, who gave a fake, pitying pout, and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, cutting off the view of her husband and his mother, laughing over the signed papers, Madeline didn't cry. She exhaled. A long, deep breath she felt she had been holding for 5 years. She reached into her bag and pulled out a burner phone. She dialed a number she hadn't called since the day she said I do. It rang once. It's done, she said into the phone. I'm free. A deep, gravelly voice on the other end answered immediately. About time, Maddie. The board has been asking questions, and he's missed you. I'll be at the Teterboro airstrip in 40 minutes, she said. Tell him I'm coming home. The first week after the divorce was exactly what Grant Caldwell had expected a celebration. The news hit the tabloids, of course. Caldwell air dumps Cinderella, back to rags for Madeline. The articles were vicious, clearly planted by Lenora's PR team. They painted Madeline as a gold digger who had failed to secure the bag, a simpleton who couldn't keep up with the high-octane lifestyle of the New York elite. Grant felt lighter. He was free of Madeline's quiet judgment. He was free of her constant nagging about ethics in his shipping contracts. He was free to be with Jessica, who laughed at his jokes, drank expensive champagne without wincing, and looked fantastic on his arm at charity balls. But by the 3rd week, the atmosphere in the Caldwell Logistics headquarters began to shift. It started with small things. Grant sat in his office, staring at a contract on his desk. It was a renewal agreement with Orion Tech, a massive supplier of microchips from Taiwan. It was their biggest account. It kept the company in the green. Why haven't they signed? Grant barked into his intercom. Jessica, get me the file on Orion. Jessica hurried in, looking flustered. She was wearing a dress that cost more than Madeline's entire wardrobe, but she couldn't find the file. I can't find the correspondence, Grant. I looked in the server, but the folder is encrypted. Encrypted by who? Well, the user log says MC. Grant froze. MC Madeline Caldwell. He frowned. That's ridiculous. Madeline didn't know how to use the server. She just organized the charity events and handled the household staff. But as the days went on, the silence from their partners became deafening. Grant called the CEO of Orion Tech a man named Mr. Lee. Grant had met Mr. Lee several times. They had played golf. Mr. Lee had always been incredibly warm, always asking about... Grant stopped. Mr. Lee never asked about Grant. He always asked, "How is your lovely wife? How is the insightful Madeline?" Grant dialed the number. It went to voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail. "Lenora." Grant stormed into his mother's office down the hall. "Why is everyone ghosting us? The invitation for the Met Gala. We haven't received it." Lenora looked up from her desk, her face pale. "I don't know. I called the committee chair, Susan Delancey." She hung up on me, Grant. She said what? She said she doesn't associate with traitors to the crown. I have no idea what she's talking about. We are the Caldwells. The business started to bleed. A shipment of steel was held up in customs in Hamburg. Usually Grant would come home and complain about it, and Madeline would listen quietly while making tea. Then the next morning, the problem would miraculously be solved. Grant had always assumed it was his team doing their job. Now the shipment stayed in Hamburg. The fees piled up. "Who fixed the Hamburg issue last time?" Grant screamed at his VP of operations. I thought you did, sir," the VP stammered. Well, the email usually came from your home IP address at 2:00 a.m. Grant sat back in his chair, a cold dread pooling in his stomach. Madeline. He remembered waking up sometimes in the middle of the night, seeing the light on in the study. He would find Madeline there, reading thick binders of maritime law or typing on her laptop. "Just looking up recipes," she would say, closing the laptop quickly. "Go back to sleep, Grant." "No," Grant whispered. "She was a waitress. I met her at a diner in Ohio. She didn't know anything about maritime law." "Grant," Jessica said, walking into the office looking annoyed. "We have a problem with the Obsidian Gala." The Obsidian Gala. It was the event of the season, hosted by the elusive Blackwood Group, a private equity firm that practically owned half of Europe. An invitation to the Obsidian Gala was a ticket to the inner circle of the global elite. Grant had been trying to get an invitation for 5 years. "What problem did we get snubbed?" "No," Jessica said, handing him a heavy black envelope embossed with silver leaf. "We got invited." Grant snatched the envelope. "Finally. This is it. This is how we fix the Orion deal. Mr. Lee will be there. Everyone will be there. If we secure a partnership with Blackwood, we don't need Orion." He ripped it open. The invitation was elegant, scented with a faint trace of jasmine. "Mr. Grant Caldwell and guest are cordially invited to the annual Obsidian Gala. Location, the Blackwood Estate. The Hamptons. Dress code, strict black tie." "This is perfect," Lenora said, walking in. "See, Susan Delancey knows nothing. The Blackwoods want us there. We are still on top." Grant looked at the date. It was this Saturday. "Jessica, buy the most expensive dress you can find. Mother, get the jewels out of the vault. We are going to show everyone that the Caldwells are doing just fine without Madeline." But as Grant held the card, he noticed something strange. On the back of the invitation, in tiny, almost microscopic font, were the coordinates for the landing strip at the estate. And beneath that, a Latin phrase, "Veritas vos liberabit." "The truth shall set you free." Grant ignored it. He was too busy imagining the look on everyone's faces when he walked in with the senator's daughter on his arm, sealing the biggest deal of his life. He didn't know that 3,000 miles away, in a glass-walled chateau overlooking the Mediterranean Sea, Madeline was standing on a balcony. She wasn't wearing beige anymore. She was wearing a silk robe that cost more than Grant's car. She was holding a phone to her ear. "They received the invitation, Miss Sterling," a voice said. Madeline. No Clara Sterling. For that was the name on her birth certificate, the name she had buried to live a simple life. Smiled. It was a smile that would have terrified Lenora Caldwell. "Good," Clara said. "Prepare the jet, Harrison. We're going to New York." "Are you sure you want to do this, Clara?" the voice asked. "You know what happens when you step back into the light." "I spent 5 years in the dark, making a mediocre man feel like a king," Clara replied, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. "It's time he learns who really wore the crown." She hung up the phone and turned back into the room. Sitting on the couch, reading a newspaper, was a man. He looked up. He had silver fox hair, piercing green eyes, and an aura of power that made Grant Caldwell look like a playful puppy. This was Nathaniel Blackwood, the head of the Blackwood Group. The billionaire the world thought was a recluse. "Ready to go destroy your ex-husband?" Nathaniel asked, a smirk playing on his lips. Clara walked over and poured herself a drink. "I'm not going to destroy him, Nate. I'm just going to introduce him to reality." The Blackwood estate in the Hamptons wasn't just a house. It was a fortress of limestone and glass carved into the cliffs of East Hampton, occupying a stretch of land that wasn't supposed to be zoned for residential use. It was a place where the air smelled of salt pine and old money. Grant Caldwell adjusted his bow tie in the rear-view mirror of the rented Rolls-Royce Phantom. He looked impeccable. He wore a custom Brioni tuxedo, the midnight blue fabric shimmering slightly under the interior lights. Beside him, Jessica was busy taking selfies, the flash illuminating the cavernous back seat. She wore a sheer silver dress that left little to the imagination, a stark contrast to the elegant, understated gowns usually seen at these events. "Stop flashing that thing," Lenora snapped from the front seat. "We are arriving at the most exclusive event in the Western Hemisphere. Act like you've been here before." "Relax, Lenora," Grant said, smoothing his lapel. "We belong here. The invite proved it. Blackwood knows who the Caldwells are. Tonight, we solidify the legacy." As the car crunched over the gravel of the long, winding driveway, Grant felt a surge of triumph. The last few weeks of business failures, the missing contracts, the silence from partners, it would all be fixed tonight. One handshake with Nathaniel Blackwood and the shipping lanes would open up again. They pulled up to the entrance. It was a spectacle. Valets in white uniforms scurried around cars that cost more than small countries. There were no paparazzi. The Blackwood Gala was a strictly private affair. The only cameras allowed were the security drones buzzing silently overhead. Grant stepped out, offering his hand to Jessica. She took it, beaming, her diamond bracelet bought on company credit catching the light. Lenora followed, head held high, scanning the crowd for anyone she could impress. But as they walked up the grand staircase toward the massive double doors, the atmosphere was odd. Usually when the Caldwells arrived, heads turned. People whispered. Tonight, no one looked at them. The crowd was gathered in clusters, speaking in hushed, frantic tones. They weren't looking at the arrivals. They were looking at the sky. "Why is everyone standing outside?" Jessica asked, shivering slightly in the cool evening breeze. Grant frowned. He spotted Mr. Henderson, his lawyer, standing near a potted olive tree, looking pale. "Henderson," Grant said, walking over. "What's going on?" "Why aren't we inside?" Henderson jumped, spilling a bit of his scotch. "Grant, you came." "Of course I came. I was invited. What is happening? "Mr. Blackwood hasn't arrived yet," Henderson whispered, leaning in. "Rumor has it he's bringing a guest. The silent partner." "The silent partner," Grant scoffed. "Sounds like an urban legend. Blackwood runs the show alone." "No," Henderson said, his eyes darting around. "The market has been whispering about it for years. There's someone else behind the Blackwood group. Someone who directs the capital flow. They say she or he is finally coming out of the shadows tonight to announce a hostile takeover of a major logistics firm." Grant laughed. "Well, I hope it's not us. Come on, Mother. Let's get a drink." They moved to the terrace which overlooked the private airstrip that belonged to the estate. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple. Suddenly, the wind picked up. The chatter on the terrace died down instantly. From the north, a low rumble vibrated through the floorboards. It grew louder, a deep mechanical roar that seemed to shake the champagne in the glasses. "Is that—" Jessica pointed. Descending through the clouds was a jet. But not just any jet. It was a Gulfstream G700 painted in matte black with a single silver stripe running down the fuselage. It was a predator of the skies. "That's Blackwood," a man next to Grant whispered reverently. "That's the Obsidian." The jet banked sharply, executing a landing that was both aggressive and perfectly controlled. It touched down on the private strip, the engines screaming as they reversed thrust. The Caldwells watched, mesmerized. This was power. This was the level of wealth Grant had always chased, but never quite caught. The jet taxied to a halt at the end of the red carpet that had been rolled out onto the tarmac. A fleet of black SUVs raced out to meet it. The door of the jet opened. The stairs lowered automatically. First, Nathaniel Blackwood emerged. He looked every bit the billionaire titan, tall, silver-haired, wearing a tuxedo that made Grant's look off the rack. He paused at the top of the stairs, smiling at the crowd on the terrace. But he didn't descend. He turned back to the open door and held out his hand. "Who is he waiting for?" Lenora hissed. "Is it a celebrity?" A hand took Nathaniel's. A woman stepped out. The breath caught in Grant's throat. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. She was wearing a gown of liquid gold that clung to her frame like a second skin, with a slit that went up to her thigh and a back that plunged dangerously low. Her hair, which Grant had only ever seen in a messy bun or a sensible ponytail, was cascading down her back in dark, glossy waves. Around her neck sat a necklace of emeralds and diamonds that was so large, so brilliant, it looked heavy. She stood at the top of the stairs, surveying the crowd with a look of bored, regal amusement. "My God," Jessica whispered. "Who is that?" "She's gorgeous." Grant couldn't speak. His brain was misfiring, trying to reconcile two impossible images. The woman in the gold dress walked with a predator's grace. She radiated danger. She looked like she owned the very air they were breathing. But the face, the arch of the eyebrows, the curve of the lips, the way she tilted her head slightly to the left. It was Madeline. "No," Grant whispered, his voice cracking. "That's not possible." "What did you say?" Lenora snapped. "That's Madeline," Grant said louder this time. "That's my wife." "Ex-wife," Jessica corrected instinctively. Lenora squinted, raising her glasses. She gasped, dropping her clutch. It can't be. That mousy little thing. In a dress like that." Standing next to Nathaniel Blackwood. "Don't be absurd, Grant. It's a look-alike. Madeline is probably scrubbing floors in Ohio by now." But as the woman descended the stairs, her hand resting lightly on Nathaniel's arm, the wind blew her hair back, revealing her face clearly to the terrace onlookers. She looked up. Across the distance of 200 yards, her eyes locked directly onto Grant's. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She simply raised her chin, a gesture of absolute dominance, and turned away, stepping into the waiting SUV. The crowd on the terrace erupted. "Who is she? Is that the silent partner? I heard she's European royalty." Grant stood frozen, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The woman he had discarded, the woman he had called boring and simple, had just arrived in $100 million jet. And she was coming for him. The ballroom was a masterpiece of excess. Chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, and a live orchestra played Debussy in the corner. Grant Caldwell was on his third scotch. He hadn't moved from the bar since entering. His eyes were glued to the massive double doors at the top of the grand staircase, waiting for them to enter. "Grant, stop it!" Lenora hissed, pinching his arm. "You're making a scene. It wasn't her. It was a trick of the light. Madeline bought her clothes at outlet and malls. That woman was wearing a customized Versace. It's impossible." "I know my wife, Mother," Grant muttered, swirling the amber liquid. "I lived with her for 5 years. I know her walk." "You didn't know her at all," a voice said from beside him. Grant turned. It was Mr. Lee, the CEO of Orion Tech, the man who had been ghosting Grant's calls for weeks. "Mr. Lee." Grant straightened up, putting on his sales face. "So good to see you. I've been trying to reach you regarding the renewal contract. We really need to—" Mr. Lee held up a hand, his expression cold. "We won't be renewing, Grant." "What, why we've been partners for a decade?" "We were partners with Madeline," Mr. Lee said simply. "Or as we know her, Miss Sterling. When she left the Caldwell table, we left with her." Grant blinked. "Miss Sterling? Who is Miss Sterling?" Before Mr. Lee could answer, the music stopped. The room went silent. At the top of the staircase, the doors swung open. Nathaniel Blackwood stood there, looking every inch the king of the evening. He stepped aside. Madeline walked out. Up close, she was even more devastating. The gold dress caught every photon of light in the room. She wore her beauty like armor. She didn't look nervous. She looked bored. They began to descend the stairs. The crowd parted at the bottom like the Red Sea. Grant pushed through the people, ignoring Lenora's hissed warnings. He had to know. He had to confront her. As Madeline reached the bottom step, a waiter appeared with a tray of champagne. She took one, her movements elegant and practiced. "Madeline." The name tore through the polite silence of the room. Grant stumbled forward, breaking the circle of admirers that had already formed around her and Nathaniel. Madeline stopped. She turned slowly, her movement fluid. She looked at Grant with the mild curiosity one might show a bug on a windshield. "Hello, Grant," she said. Her voice was the same, yet entirely different. It had lost the softness, the hesitancy. It was polished steel. What is this?" Grant gestured wildly at her dress, the room Nathaniel. "What are you doing here?" "How did you get in?" Lenora pushed up beside Grant, recovering her composure. She looked Madeline up and down with a sneer. "Yes, Madeline. Do tell. Did you find a rich boyfriend to pay for a ticket, or are you part of the catering staff?" The crowd gasped. A few people chuckled nervously. Nathaniel Blackwood stepped forward, his green eyes flashing with amusement. "Careful, Mrs. Caldwell. You are speaking to the host." Lenora froze. "Excuse me." "I said, Nathaniel repeated his voice, carrying to the back of the room. "You are speaking to the host. This estate, this gala, and indeed the Blackwood Group itself. It doesn't belong to me." He turned to Madeline and bowed his head slightly. "It belongs to her." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Grant stared at his ex-wife. "That's a lie. You're a waitress. You're from Ohio. I checked your background. I hired a PI. Madeline took a sip of champagne and smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "You checked Madeline Smith, the identity I created when I wanted to leave my family and live a normal life," she said softly. "You never checked Clara Madeline Sterling." "Sterling?" Lenora whispered, the color draining from her face. "As in Sterling Industries, the European banking conglomerate." "My grandfather founded it," Madeline Clara said. "My father expanded it, and I inherited it when I was 22. But I hated the life. I hated the sycophants, the gold diggers, the people who only loved me for the name. So I left. I went to America. I became a nobody. I wanted to see if I could find someone who loved me, just for me." She took a step toward Grant. He instinctively took a step back. "I thought I found that with you, Grant," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "I thought you were a hard-working, honest man. So I helped you. Who do you think renegotiated your steel contracts? Who do you think fixed the Hamburg customs issues? Who do you think quietly injected capital into Caldwell Logistics every time you made a bad bet?" Grant's mouth opened and closed. You did that." "I did," she said. "I spent 5 years playing the dutiful, quiet wife, using my connections in the dark to build your empire, hoping that one day you would appreciate me. Not the money. Me." She laughed, a bitter sound. "But you didn't. You grew arrogant. You thought you were a genius. And then you got bored. You found Jessica." She glanced at Jessica, who was trying to hide behind Grant's shoulder. "And then you tossed me out like garbage," Clara continued. "You made me sign a divorce decree that gave me nothing. You thought you were clever. Maddie, please," Grant stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. The eyes of the entire room were boring into him. He saw the looks of disgust on the faces of his business partners. "We can talk about this in private." "We have nothing to talk about," Clara said. "You wanted a divorce. You got one. You wanted me out of your business. I'm out." She turned to Nathaniel. "Nate, what is the status of the acquisition?" Nathaniel pulled a document from his jacket pocket. "The board of Caldwell Logistics voted an hour ago, Clara. Since the company's credit rating collapsed 3 weeks ago, coincidentally, right after you stopped managing their accounts, their debt was callable. Sterling Industries bought the debt." Grant felt the room spin. You bought my debt." "We own the company, Grant," Nathaniel said cheerfully. "Well, she owns the company. Hostile takeover. It was remarkably cheap." Clara looked at Grant one last time. There was no love in her eyes anymore, only pity. "You forced me to sign those papers because you wanted to save your fortune." "Grant," she said. "But you didn't realize that I was your fortune." She turned her back on him. "Security," she said calmly. "Please escort Mr. Caldwell and his guests off my property. They are trespassing." 2 massive security guards materialized from the crowd. Grant tried to protest, tried to grab Madeline's arm, but he was seized by the shoulders. "Madeline, you can't do this," he screamed as he was dragged toward the doors. "I'm your husband. Ex-husband," she called out without looking back. As the doors slammed shut on Grant's screaming face, the orchestra started playing again. The crowd, sensing the shift in power, surged forward, desperate to get a word with Clara Sterling, the Queen of the Hamptons. But Clara wasn't looking at them. She walked over to the balcony, looking out at the dark ocean. Nathaniel joined her. That was theatrical. It was necessary, she said, taking a deep breath. Is it really over? The business part? Yes, we own him, Nathaniel said. But he's not going to go quietly. You humiliated a narcissist in front of the world, Clara. He's going to come back, and he's going to try to hurt you. Clara took a sip of her drink, her eyes hardening. Let him try, she said. I'm not hiding anymore. The fall of the House of Caldwell was not a slow decline. It was a cliff dive. 3 days after the Blackwood Gala, Grant Caldwell sat in the living room of the penthouse he was about to lose. The curtains were drawn. The room smelled of stale takeout and desperation. They froze the accounts, Grant, Lenora said. She was pacing the floor, no longer the composed matriarch. Her hair was unkempt, and she was wearing a bathrobe at 2:00 p.m. I tried to use the Amex at the pharmacy. Declined. I tried the Cayman account. Access denied. They say there's an audit pending. Grant stared at his phone. He was reading the comments on the New York Post article titled, "The Sterling Queen Takes Her Throne." User 123. Karma is a chef's kiss. Waltzed bully. Grant Caldwell couldn't run a lemonade stand. Sterling was the brain all along. Maddie fan. Queen behavior. Grant hurled the phone across the room. It shattered against the marble fireplace. It's not fair, he screamed, standing up. I built this company. I was the face. She just sat in the background. She owns the debt, Grant, Lenora snapped. She owns us. Unless what? Unless we prove she stole it, Lenora said, her eyes narrowing. Think, Grant. She was Madeline Smith for 5 years. That's identity fraud. If we can prove she signed the prenup under a false identity, the divorce is void. If the divorce is void, you are still married. And if you are still married, Grant's eyes widened, then half of her assets are marital property, half of Sterling Industries. It was a long shot. It was a desperate, filthy legal maneuver. But it was all they had. I need a lawyer, Grant said. Henderson won't take my calls. Forget Henderson, Lenora said. He's a coward. Call Silas Vane. Silas Vane was a disbarred attorney who operated out of a basement in Queens. He was known as the pit bull for people who had no other options. He didn't care about the law. He cared about loopholes and blackmail. Grant met Silas an hour later at a diner. Grant wore a baseball cap and sunglasses, terrified of being recognized. Identity fraud is good, Silas grunted, picking his teeth with a toothpick. But it takes too long in court. You need leverage now. You need to scare her into a settlement. How? Grant asked. She's untouchable. She has Blackwood security. Everyone has a skeleton, Silas said. You lived with her for 5 years. Think, did she ever slip up? Did she ever make a call she shouldn't have? Did she ever hide anything? Grant racked his brain. He thought about the quiet nights, the boring dinners. The diaries, Grant whispered. What diaries? She used to write in these black leather journals every night. Grant said, the memory surfacing. I thought it was just feelings or recipes, but she was obsessive about it. She kept them in a safe in the floorboards of the closet. I never knew the combination. If she was secretly running the company, Silas said, leaning in. Those journals contain insider trading information, evidence that she was manipulating stock prices while hiding her identity. That's federal prison time. Grant felt a surge of hope. The penthouse is being seized tomorrow morning. The journals might still be there. Get them, Silas said, and we don't go to the police. We go to her. We trade the journals for your company back. Grant rushed back to the penthouse. He ran to the master bedroom, the room he used to share with Madeline, the room he had kicked her out of, to make space for Jessica. Speaking of Jessica, Grant burst into the room to find Jessica packing a Louis Vuitton trunk. "Jess, what are you doing?" Jessica didn't look up. "Leaving Grant. I have a flight to Milan in 3 hours." "Milan? But we have to fight this. I have a plan. We're going to get everything back." Jessica zipped the bag shut and stood up. She looked at him with cold, dead eyes. "Grant, look at you. You're sweating. You're broke. And honestly, you were never that smart. My father warned me about you." "I bought you that bag," Grant shouted. "And Madeline bought you your career," Jessica shot back. "I'm not making the same mistake she did. I'm cutting my losses." She walked past him, the wheels of her suitcase rolling over the hardwood floor. "Goodbye, Grant." Grant stood there, trembling with rage. He was alone, truly alone. He dropped to his knees in the closet, ripping up the carpet. There, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, was the small safe. He didn't have the combination, but he had a crowbar from the utility room. For an hour he smashed and pried at the metal box, sweating, cursing, crying. Finally, the hinge gave way. Inside, there were 5 black journals. Grant opened the first one. It wasn't recipes. It was data. Comprehensive handwritten logs of every illegal thing Grant had done. January 12th. Grant ordered the disposal of toxic waste in the Jersey wetlands to save $40,000 on filtration. I have the invoice numbers. March 4th. Grant bribed the safety inspector for the crane operation. Payment made via Shell Company in Belize. July 20th. Grant is skimming from the employee pension fund to pay for the diamond necklace for Jay. Grant went pale. These weren't her secrets. They were his. She had been documenting his crimes to protect herself if he ever tried to frame her. But then he found it. In the last journal, on the very last page, a note written in a hurried scrawl. "If I have to use the Sterling Protocol to save the company, I will be bypassing international sanctions on the grim market steel imports. It's illegal, but it's the only way to save Grant's reputation." Grant smiled, a wicked, twisted smile. She had broken the law to save him. She had admitted to bypassing sanctions. That was international fraud. "Got you," Grant whispered. He didn't call Silas. He called the number for Clara Sterling's private office, which he had found online. "This is Grant Caldwell," he said to the assistant. "Tell your boss I have her journals. Tell her I know about the Sterling Protocol. If she doesn't meet me tonight, I'm sending photos of these pages to the FBI." The assistant put him on hold. 2 minutes later, she came back. "Miss Sterling will see you. Tonight, 10:00 p.m., at the old warehouse in Brandon. Come alone." The warehouse on the Brandon waterfront was a relic of the old Caldwell Empire. It was a massive rusted structure where Grant's father had started the business 50 years ago. Now it was empty, the wind whistling through broken windows. Grant parked his rental car, a beat-up Ford, and walked toward the single light bulb hanging over the side entrance. He clutched the bag containing the journals to his chest. He felt powerful again. He had the weapon. He pushed the door open. The interior was vast and shadowed. In the center of the concrete floor, a single table was set up. Clara sat there. She wasn't wearing the gold dress this time. She wore a sharp, white, power suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked like a judge ready to pass a sentence. Behind her in the shadows stood Nathaniel Blackwood, arms crossed. "You came," Clara said, her voice echoing in the empty space. "You didn't leave me a choice," Grant sneered, walking up to the table. He slammed the bag of journals down. "You thought you were so smart documenting everything, but you incriminated yourself, Maddie, bypassing sanctions. That's 20 years in prison." Clara looked at the bag. She didn't look scared. She looked disappointed. "Is that what you think this is, Grant leverage?" "It is leverage," Grant shouted. "Here is the deal. You sign Caldwell Logistics back over to me. You return the penthouse. You give me $100 million in alimony. And I burn these journals. If not, I walk out of here and go straight to the feds." Nathaniel stepped forward, but Clara held up a hand to stop him. "Grant," Clara said calmly, "did you read the date on that entry?" "What?" "The entry about the sanctions. Did you read the date?" Grant frowned. He opened the book again. "October 14th. "October 14th of which year?" Clara asked. Grant looked closer. The year wasn't written on the page. "It doesn't matter," Grant yelled. "You admitted it." "It matters," Clara said, standing up. "Because on October 14th of the year, the sanctions were active, I wasn't in charge of the accounts anymore. You were." "Liar. You did everything." "I did the work," Clara corrected. "But you signed the checks. You authorized the deals. And that entry that wasn't a confession of what I did. That was a note of what you ordered me to do." "I never ordered that. Really." Clara reached under the table and pulled out a file. "Because I have the email chain right here. From Grant Caldwell to Madeline Smith. Subject: Just get it done. I don't care how." She tossed the file onto the table. Photos of the emails spilled out. "I warned you in the reply," Clara continued. "I said, 'Grant, this violates the Sterling Protocol and international law.' And you replied, 'Do it or you're out on the street.'" Grant stared at the papers. He remembered. He had been drunk. He was stressed about the quarterly earnings. He had just told her to fix it. "So," Grant stammered, "it's still your handwriting in the journal. It's he said, she said." "No, Grant." Nathaniel spoke up, his voice deep and vibrating with authority. "It's not." Nathaniel pulled a small remote from his pocket and pressed a button. A projector screen descended from the darkness above them. A video flickered to life. It was the view from a hidden camera. It showed the interior of the Caldwell penthouse study dated 3 years ago. In the video, Grant was pacing. He was on the phone. "I don't care if it's illegal." "Steve," Video Grant was shouting, "just bribe the inspector. Use the offshore account. Madeline is too soft to do it, so I have to do it behind her back. Just make sure her name isn't on any of the documents. I want the profit, not the risk." Grant watched the video, his mouth open. You bugged the house." "I didn't," Clara said. "You did. You installed the security system to watch the staff because you were paranoid they were stealing your silverware. You forgot that the system records audio. And you forgot that I was the one who managed the cloud storage backup." Clara walked around the table, her heels clicking on the concrete. "I kept these recordings for 3 years, Grant. I hoped I would never have to use them. I hoped you would let me go with dignity. I left with nothing. I gave you a clean slate. But you couldn't leave it alone. You had to come after me." This is entrapment," Grant yelled. "I'll sue you." "It's not entrapment," Nathaniel said. "It's evidence, and we aren't the only ones watching." Clara gestured to the shadows on the far side of the warehouse. Grant spun around. Walking out of the darkness were 3 men in windbreakers. On the back of their jackets were 3 yellow letters FBI. "Grant Caldwell," the lead agent said, stepping into the light. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to violate international trade sanctions." Grant looked at Clara. "You set me up. You invited me here, not to negotiate." "I invited you here to give you a chance to confess," Clara said softly. "If you had come here and apologized, if you had shown 1 ounce of remorse, maybe I would have helped you. Maybe I would have kept the video buried. But you came here to blackmail me." The agents moved in, grabbing Grant's arms. "Madeline, Maddie, please!" Grant screamed as the handcuffs clicked shut. He struggled, looking back at her with wild, terrified eyes. I'm sorry, don't let them take me. I can't go to jail. I'm a Caldwell." "You're not a Caldwell anymore, Grant," Clara said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You're just a memory." They dragged him toward the exit. His screams echoed off the metal walls until the heavy door slammed shut, cutting off the sound. Silence returned to the warehouse. Clara let out a long, shaky breath. She leaned against the table, her strength finally wavering. Nathaniel was there in an instant, his hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" Clara looked at the spot where her husband had stood. "I spent 5 years trying to make him love me, and it took 5 minutes to destroy him." "He destroyed himself, Clara," Nathaniel said gently. "You just turned on the lights." Clara straightened her jacket. She wiped a single tear from her cheek. "Is it done?" she asked. "The board meets tomorrow," Nathaniel said. "With Grant arrested, the stock will plummet. We will buy the remaining shares for pennies. By noon tomorrow, Sterling Industries will own 100% of Caldwell Logistics. You will have total control." Clara nodded. She picked up the bag of journals, the record of her pain, her silence, and her survival. "Burn them," she said, tossing the bag to Nathaniel. "I don't want to read them ever again." "And what will you do?" Clara walked toward the door, the moonlight framing her silhouette. "I have a company to run," she said, "and I think I'm overdue for a vacation. Italy sounds nice." "I have a villa in Tuscany," Nathaniel offered, walking beside her. "It has a vineyard and excellent security." Clara looked at him. For the first time in years, her smile reached her eyes. "Is that a business proposal, Mr. Blackwood? Call it a merger of interests." He smiled. As they walked out into the cool Brandon night, the rain had stopped. The sky was clear, and for the first time in her life, Clara Sterling was free. 1 year later. The Federal Correctional Institution at Otisville is not the worst prison in America, but for a man who used to fly on private jets and drink whiskey that cost more than a Honda Civic, it was hell on earth. Grant Caldwell sat in the common room staring at the communal television bolted to the wall. He was thinner now. His hair, once perfectly coiffed, was buzzing short and graying at the temples. He held a plastic cup of lukewarm water. "Hey, Caldwell," a fellow inmate, a former stockbroker named Miller, nudged him. "Look, isn't that your old company?" Grant looked up. On the screen, CNN was broadcasting live from the port of New York. A massive new cargo ship was being christened. It was a behemoth of engineering, painted in the sleek, matte black and silver colors of Sterling Industries. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Sterling Industries unveils the Silent Storm, the world's most advanced eco-freighter." And there she was. Clara Sterling stood on the podium. She wasn't hiding behind a man anymore. She wasn't standing in the background holding a purse. She was front and center, gripping the microphone with confidence. She wore a tailored crimson suit that screamed power. "We are building a future where profit does not come at the expense of integrity," Clara said into the cameras, her voice clear and strong. "This ship represents a new era for logistics, an era where we don't cut corners, where we don't hide in the dark." The crowd cheered. Standing just behind her, applauding the loudest, was Nathaniel Blackwood. Grant felt a physical pain in his chest, a hollowness that seemed to expand with every beat of his heart. "She looks like $1 billion." Miller laughed. "Man, you really fumbled the bag, didn't you? You had the golden goose, and you cooked her for dinner." Grant didn't answer. He stood up and walked back to his cell, the sound of the applause ringing in his ears. He sat on his cot and looked at the small, torn photograph he had managed to keep. It was from his wedding day. Madeline looked so young, so hopeful. He remembered how she had looked at him that day, like he was the sun and the stars. He realized now, in the cold silence of his cell, that he had never looked at her that way. He had looked at her like a mirror, something to reflect his own glory. And when he broke the mirror, he realized he had no glory of his own. 500 miles away, in a cramped pawn shop in Queens, Lenora Caldwell was arguing with a man behind bulletproof glass. "This is a vintage Cartier," she shrieked, her voice raspy. She looked older. The Botox had worn off, and the stress lines were deep canyons on her face. She was wearing a coat that had seen better days, the buttons loose. "It was insured for $50,000. "That was 10 years ago, lady," the pawnbroker said, not even looking up from his magazine. "Gold market is down and the setting is dated. I'll give you $4 grand. Take it or leave it." Lenora looked at the bracelet. It was the last piece. The penthouse was gone. The Hamptons' house was seized. The cars were auctioned off to pay the legal fees for Grant's defense, a defense that had failed miserably. $4 grand, she whispered. It wouldn't even cover the rent on her studio apartment for 2 months. "Fine," she spat, sliding the bracelet through the slot. She took the cash, her hands trembling. As she walked out onto the dirty street, she passed a newsstand. The face of Clara Sterling was on the cover of Forbes magazine. The headline read, "The Untouchable." Lenora stopped. She stared at the image of the daughter-in-law she had tormented, the woman she had called a peasant, the woman she had tried to erase. Lenora felt a tear slide down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of remorse. It was a tear of pure, bitter envy. She pulled her coat tighter and disappeared into the crowd, a ghost in a city that no longer knew her name. That evening, the celebration moved to a private vineyard in Tuscany. Clara sat on a stone wall overlooking the rolling hills, a glass of deep red Chianti in her hand. The air smelled of cypress and sun-baked earth. The noise of New York, the stress of the takeover, the drama of the trial. It all felt 1,000,000 miles away. She heard footsteps on the gravel. Nathaniel sat down beside her, loosening his tie. "The board is ecstatic," he said. "Stock is up 12% since the christening. You're the most popular CEO in the hemisphere, Clara." Clara smiled, swirling the wine. "It's strange, Nate. For so long I thought my value was in how much I could fix things for other people, how much I could endure in silence. And now I know my value is in what I build for myself," she said. Nathaniel turned to her. His green eyes were serious. "You know, I've been thinking. We make a good team. The acquisition was efficient. The transition was seamless." "Is this a performance review, Mr. Blackwood?" she teased. "No." Nathaniel chuckled. He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a ring. He pulled out a key, an old iron key. "This is the key to the wine cellar," he said. "It's been in the Blackwood family for 4 generations. Only the head of the house carries it." He placed the key in her hand. "I'm not asking you to merge companies, Clara. I'm asking you to stay. Not as a partner, not as a guest, but as whatever you want to be. I don't want to own you. I just want to be the man standing behind you while you conquer the world." Clara looked at the key, then at him. She saw the difference. Grant had wanted a wife who was a prop. Nathaniel wanted a partner who was a peer. He wasn't intimidated by her power. He was in love with it. She closed her fingers around the key. "I think," she said softly, leaning in, "that I'm going to need a lot of wine, because I have a feeling we're just getting started." Nathaniel smiled and kissed her. It wasn't a movie kiss. It was a real kiss, grounded, passionate, and full of promise. As the sun set over the Italian hills, Clara Sterling didn't look back at the life she had lost. She looked forward at the Emma she had won. She had signed the divorce quietly in the rain, with a broken heart. But she had emerged from the storm as something else entirely. She was no longer the quiet wife. She was the thunder. Grant Caldwell learned the hard way that the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one shouting orders, it's the one listening, learning, and waiting. He mistook Madeline's silence for submission, and her kindness for weakness. He thought he could discard her like an old coat, never realizing she was the one weaving the fabric of his success. In the end, Clara Sterling didn't just get revenge. She got justice. She took back her name, her fortune, and her life. She proved that when a woman finds her voice, she doesn't just speak, she roars. What did you think of Clara's revenge? Do you think Grant deserved his fate, or was prison too harsh? If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets us know you want more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a drama. And here is a challenge for the true fans. If you made it to the very end, comment the word Silent Storm down below. I'll be hearting the best comments. Thanks for watching, and remember, dear, be careful who you underestimate. See you in the next story.